Nisarga Upchar Kendra Vinoba Ashram Gotri Vadodara welcomes you. This deliberation was made by Dr. Usha Vastare during National Convention on Gandhi and Health on 19 January 2020. Distinguished neuroscientist Dr. Usha Vastare is a founder of Yogakshema Foundation, Bangalore. Yogakshema Foundation is known for its training program based on modern neuroscience, spirituality, and evolution of human mind. The topic for her lecture was Ramanam and Ekadasha Vrata, a neuroscience correlates.
My interest is in Gandhiji's inner work and not so much as his outer work. Although we know that he kept harmonizing his inner work and outer work incessantly until his last breath. I am looking at Gandhiji from his contribution towards health and well-being and to connect his inner work to the present-day neuroscience research. Gandhiji was an ardent devotee of God, a yogi, and also a scientist of the highest order. In my view, he was a living example who lived according to the core principles of Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. His autobiography, My Experiments with Truth, is a testament to that. His religion is not confined to a personal God alone, but is in the broadest sense, it is the knowledge of self. His Rama was not just Dasharatha's son, as Dr. Abhay was saying, but Atma Rama. I say Gandhiji was a scientist of the highest order because if we can follow his directions or the 11 vows he has recommended, we can also aim to attain the results he has assured us, because science is all about commonality and reproducibility. I'm going to share with you what I understand about self-discipline and using japa as a tool for enhancing our health. So we will take a look at Ramanama and also some of the vows of the Ekadash Vratas of Gandhiji from a neuroscience perspective. What happens to the brain and mind when these tools are applied on a casual, mechanical, habitual way, and also in a purposeful, deliberate and conscious ways? In other words, we will try and understand how these tools of repeating Ramanama and following his 11 vows can alter our lives from a neuroscience perspective. So, what is this Ramanama? We understand that Gandhiji was used to repeat this as a japa incessantly, continuously, endlessly, steadfastly until it became a japa for him. What we call japa is nothing but in scientific terms, repetition of a cognitive cue. We will look into the potential mechanism of action of how any of the japa or repetition of a cognitive cue may work at the level of mind and body. Before that, I will quickly run through first the 11 vows that Gandhiji prescribed, and also run through an oversimplified introduction to different parts of the brain and types of mind and their attributes, along with some basic relevant neuroscience concepts. I would like to just skip through these Ekadash Vrats because we have just heard from Dr. Abhay Bang. We know what they are. Ahimsa, Satya. He says about Satya, the truth, harmonizing thought, speech and action. This has to be the sole justification for our very existence. Asteya, Brahmacharya, we need to be going into the deeper root meaning of Brahmacharya, and not just the self-discipline of just the senses. It is actually freedom from all the senses and not just celibacy. Aparigraha, Sharir Shrama, Aswada, control of palate. Again, just to mention this little 1.5 inch piece of muscle, the tongue is the most difficult to control, whether with respect with intake of food or with respect to our speech. Sarvatra Bhaya Varjana, Sarvadharma Samanata, Swadeshi. One word of caution with Swadeshi is there should not be any room of selfishness, he says that. And it is not a cult of hatredness. No harboring of ill towards foreigners. Many a times when it is taken at the superficial level, it leads to either hatredness or shunning away towards the shunning away from the foreigners or the foreign goods. And the asparsha bhavana, we all know how much he tried to remove untouchability. He says, all are sparks of the same fire, and none can be born untouchable. With that, I just move to understanding brain and mind to a certain extent. And I would like to try and see how we can actually confluence the Ramanama Japa and the vows that he talked about in each of these scientific slides, be it at the level of brain or mind or with respect to the neuroscience concept, so that we can go deeper and understand the significance of this Ramanama or when we actually do the japa. Couple of things that we need to understand about the brain, that it has unlimited potential. If I have to just say it in one sentence and convert this into a mathematical expression, we know the basic cells of the brain, we call them as neurons. There are many different types of brain cells, but we'll just stick to neurons. If we start counting the neuron, and if it takes 1 second to count each neuron, literally it will take over 3,100 years to count all the neurons. amazing fact. This I'm talking about just number of neurons. If we actually take the synaptic connections, we know the number of synaptic connections that we have exceed the number of atoms that exist in the whole world. Really hard to fathom, but extremely difficult, important to remember. And this is what our Gandhiji tapped into, this unlimited potential of the brain. And this we can actually understand as we go along, this unlimited potential of the brain, how it connects with both mind-body connection, that because we know that there is a very close connection between body and mind. And understanding the unlimited potential of the brain actually helps us. And this information we can actually use to understand our own health, to enhance our own health, well-being, and also to be evolving. The next aspect of the brain is about, brain is like the biggest pharmacy that you can find. This pharmacy is open 24/7. It is open until the last breath of our lives. What do I mean by that? All it means is every thought, every feeling, every emotion releases a chemical. So much so, the brain is considered to be the biggest pharmacy one can find. This knowledge Gandhiji tapped into when he used Ramanama incessantly. Because if every thought, every emotion and feeling releases a chemical, imagine, with his practice, Ramanama became ajapa japa for him. So in the same token, every positive thought releases a positive chemical. And negative thoughts release negative chemicals into the body, into the brain. And it won't just remain in the brain. It gets distributed throughout the body through the nerve endings and through the blood vessels. This is how whatever we think, whatever we feel, even though the thoughts and feelings occur in the brain, they have an effect on the body through these chemicals. The same token, the chemicals that are released in Ramanama, what type of chemicals can they be? When it takes us to such an elevated state of mind, and contrast that with our stressful thoughts, our stressful feelings and emotions, what kind of chemicals can some stressful events can release, and what kind of havoc can it have on our bodies? This, without using any of these terms, Gandhiji understood to the fullest extent, and he practiced this. And we know the effect of stress on our sympathetic nervous system, and also when we have to come out of the stress, how do we have to activate the parasympathetic nervous system? That's quite old information, which I'm not going to go into, because that is available in our textbooks, in medical textbooks. That kind of information is available on the internet. So for the lack of time, I'm not going to go into how the chemicals that are released during Ramanama can overcome stress. I'm just going to say this. Ramanama activates the parasympathetic nervous system by releasing some of those chemicals to help overcome stress. But yet, let us just look into what type of chemicals are released. These studies have been done with respect to meditation. I have actually synthesized many studies and then giving you like a power capsule here. We can consider japa also as a type of meditation. If that is the case, what type of chemicals are released? During meditation or during japa meditation, during the japa? These are the feel-good chemicals. These are the calm chemicals, so as to say. It could be GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. It could be melatonin. It could be serotonin or 5-HT, 5-hydrotryptophan. It could be dopamine. These chemicals are the feel-good chemicals, happy chemicals, along with many others too. These feel-good, happy chemicals are released during meditation, and we can also say these are the ones that are released during japa. And conversely, the stress chemicals could be cortisol, could be norepinephrine. They are decreased during meditation. And beta endorphins are increased. So in general, whether it is meditation or with japa, the feel-good chemicals, happy chemicals are released so as to help us to attain a state of equanimity over a period of time. Because we know while we are doing japa or meditation, we are peaceful, we are calm, we are in that equanimous state. But to have the same effect at other times, japa has to be done consistently and it has to become like a habit. The next aspect of brain that we need to know is that brain acts like a magician, like a genie. It's actually waiting for command. It's waiting for every command. What is it that we are going to command out of this brain? Whatever we command the brain, it is going to give us. There is one little aspect that we need to understand, that anything that we ask for, we need to follow it up with action. That is when brain works like a genie or a magician. I think this is what Dr. Abhay's talk at the end, what I little understood with that letter he talked. Put it into action. Just thinking about it is not going to be enough. We need to put anything to action to make it work. And coming into parts of the brain. In US, there is a separate course of neuroanatomy and it takes one whole semester. But here, I'm going to take about 1.5 minutes. Whatever that is necessary for us to understand how the japa works is enough for us for the time being. Brain can be divided into two parts. The higher center, which is the part of the brain that makes us human, and the lower center, which in technical terms is nothing but the lizard brain and the squirrel brain. Yes, technical terms. Easier for us to understand. It is nothing but the midbrain and the limbic system. The two together I have combined to say it is the lower center. Higher center, as I mentioned, is what makes us human. And in this higher center, from this higher center, we get the conscious mind, the willful mind, the rational mind. And the qualities of the conscious mind, be it made the free will, the choice that we need to make, or the discerning power, or the willpower, and the self-awareness, all of these come from the willful mind or the conscious mind or the rational mind, which I have put it as buddhi, very simple terms, as buddhi, which comes from the high center of the brain. Whereas the non-conscious mind or the subconscious mind comes from the lower center of the brain, which I have very simply termed as manas. This is how Bhagavad Gita classifies as manas and buddhi. When we actually do any japa, be it me Ramanam, whichever japa that you do, what type of mind are we using? Which part of the brain are we using? When the japa becomes mechanical, even then it has an effect, no doubt about it. When the japa becomes mechanical, we are using mostly the lower center of the brain, or just the mind, or the non-conscious mind. When we do the japa in a conscious manner, mindful manner, then we are using the higher center of the brain, or the conscious, willful mind. Just for us to keep this in mind. If I have to combine the practice of japa, go just a little bit deeper into this, is when usually in the beginning, we start off doing japa in a very conscious manner, in a willful manner, in a mindful manner. That is when we're using the higher center. That's when we, especially when the beginning we start off japa, we find lot of positive results. But after some time, and rightly so, it becomes mechanical. And I understand, not all the time we can do it in a mindful way. However, when it becomes mechanical, this is when it helps for you to increase the number of japa, the repetitions more and more. That is when, even when it is mechanical, it has an effect. We will go deeper again in the next few minutes. So, as long as we understand which part of the brain are we using when we do the japa, and which type of mind are we using when we are doing the japa, at least from now on you will be able to distinguish when the japa becomes mechanical, when are you doing it in a mindful way. Maybe we can take this a little bit deeper during the panel discussion. For now, this is going to be enough. Knowing that the japa can be done or should be started off in a conscious, mindful way, and many a times it goes into a mechanical way of repeating the japa, then we are using mostly our mind, not our buddhi. Although both of them have positive effects. What type of positive effects is, we will take it up in the panel discussion. This slide depicts the types of mind which I have just described. Whenever we are in the habitual mode, or whenever we are using the habitual mind, or the non-conscious mind, or the subconscious mind, or as we call manas, most of the times we are in the quote-unquote survival mode. And if we need to be changing, if we need to be transforming, if we need to be evolving, we need to be using the willful mind, the conscious mind. That is nothing but our buddhi, according to Bhagavad Gita. So even though we know all of this, and I just said we need to be using our higher center of the brain, or our buddhi, or the part of the brain that makes us human more and more and more, we know this, but yet something prevents us. Not just for the few of us, for everybody, be one may be a scientist or a sadhu, a professor or a student, a doctor or a patient, irrespective of who it is, for everybody, something prevents us. This is what neuroscience says. What is it? What is it that prevents us to be using our conscious mind most of the time? That does not mean, I'm not saying that we should not be using our habitual mind. The things that we actually want, in other words, the good habits that we have, that comes from the lower center of the brain or the habitual mind. And it is very efficient, and so be it. However, if we want to be changing and transforming, we need to be using our buddhi more and more. And what is it that prevents? Neuroscience says it is the bias towards negativity, partiality towards negativity. That is what is preventing us to be evolving, to be transforming, to be changing, or to be able to follow the 11 vows that Gandhiji has given us and to reap the benefits. Many a times this negativity is what is preventing us. What is this negativity bias? Again, neuroscience says this is very important. This bias is there for a reason, very important for our survival. However, this negativity bias is what is preventing us to evolve. Then what is this negativity bias? Again, recent research shows that anything that is negative, be it a negative thought, a negative feeling, negative emotion, negative perception, negative memory, negative belief system, they all stick like Velcro to our minds. The same way, something that is positive could be a positive thought, a positive emotion, positive feeling, positive memory, positive experience. They get washed off like Teflon. Teflon, we know it's a material that is coated on a non-stick pan. Anything that positive gets washed away. So much so because the negative thoughts stick longer, they have an effect. And that is when they produce lot more of these negative thoughts. And we don't have to put any effort for this. Happens automatically, so much so, they're given a name called automatic negative thoughts. You take the first letter of each word, and what you see is the picture that is depicted in the slide. Ants. Here I have shown only one type of ant on the slide. However, in nature, in reality, we get many different types of negative thoughts. We're not going to go into all the classification of the negative thoughts. Just to remember two important ones, which are like termites. In nature, the ants, in the ant population, we know the termites are the worst population with respect to what is found in nature. Similar to termite population in thoughts, blaming others, blaming the situation, blaming the circumstances, and defending ourselves are the worst automatic negative thoughts equivalent to termites. Just for you to keep in mind, because when we are blaming others or defending ourselves, we will never, ever be able to learn anything from that. Why do we need to understand about these ants, automatic negative thoughts? Because these automatic negative thoughts, when they go unchecked, they affect our relationships, they affect our learning, they affect our work that we are doing, and they affect our entire life, because it is like wearing colored glasses. Whatever you see, it is going to look colored. I think I'm already running out of time, so I'm going to really skip through saying that we need to be aware of these negative thoughts, because these negative thoughts or ants are what is going to prevent us to be in the present moment, here and now, now and here. When there are too many of these ants, they make us go back and forth like a pendulum between past and future, looking at the past with regret and looking at the future with full of anxiety and pessimism. And whatever is happening in the present moment is unsatisfactory. So we can never be in the present moment. So what is the solution for this? Solution is to be neurosculptors. A neurosculptor, this concept is nothing but, if you know, a sculptor does not put anything from the outside to create a masterpiece. He chisels out unwanted things from a big boulder or a rock to create his masterpiece. In a similar manner, if we can remove these ants from our mind using our conscious mind, the qualities of the conscious mind, the powers of our conscious mind, using our free will, our discrimination power, our willpower, and to be aware, most of all, of our own ants. This is how we chisel out and we can become neurosculptors. Unlike the real sculptor in the outside world, both the marble and the sculptor is ourselves. The marble is the brain and we are the sculptors. This is how we can actually sculpt out the future that we want. It is awaiting us. And why? Why should we become neurosculptors, and how? How does that work? This goes to little bit of history, recent history, past couple of decades, when Dalai Lama challenged the Western neuroscientists about saying that if you change your mind, you will be able to change the very structure of the brain. Couple of decades back, as neuroscientists, this is not what we had learned in our medical schools, in our graduate schools. And the neuroscientists said, no, that's not possible. If something happens to the brain, the mind will change, but not the other way around, because at that time we were looking at brain as the hardware, like the computer, brain as the hardware and mind as the software. Can changing software change the hardware in the computer? In a similar manner, neuroscientists said, no, it is not possible. However, Dalai Lama posed another challenge, saying that you test it out using the modern technology, and if I am wrong, I will go change the scriptures. Because this is what is said in Buddhist scriptures, and Buddhist scriptures come from the Hindu scriptures. And if I am right, you go change your scientific textbooks, he said. And to cut the whole story short, there was new technology at that time, like fMRI, SPECT scan, PET scans. And also Dalai Lama sent many of the Buddhist monks who had many thousands hours of meditative experiences. And the Buddhist monks' brains were scanned using the modern technology. Over a period of time, they could see the changes in the brain activity. And those brains were compared with controlled, non-meditative groups of people. And lo and behold, whatever Dalai Lama challenged became true. That means if we are able to change our minds, it is possible to change the very structure of the brain. Changing minds, not like when you went out on a coffee break, choosing coffee or tea, we can easily change our minds, not in that way, but in a very specific, willful, conscious, effortful manner, like the repetition of the japa or during the meditative states, it is possible to change the very structure of the brain. When I say the structure of the brain, like what we saw on the neurochemical slide, the chemicals will be released, so the receptors at the molecular level, it will change. The connections between neurons will change. The synaptic junctions either get activated or deactivated. That will change. That is what I mean by changing the structure of the brain. And why? Why do we need to change the structure of the brain? To put it simply, if you want to change your life, the surest way is to be able to change the brain itself. And this whole process of changing our thoughts to change our brain, changing our emotions and feelings to change our brain, changing our belief system to change our brain, changing our perception to change our brain. But just that is not going to be enough, but changing our experience to change our brain. This whole process is called neuroplasticity. What's important here is, Gandhi knew this. Just having positive thoughts are not going to be enough. Those positive thoughts have to be followed by positive feelings. Again, having just positive thoughts and positive feelings are not going to be enough. Positive thoughts, positive feelings have to be followed by positive actions. This is the surest way to be able to change the very structure of the brain through the process of neuroplasticity. So if I have to summarize all of this, maybe without the slide I can summarize, because it will take us more time. All it shows is how alpha and theta waves will change, because alpha and theta waves are the waves with greater amplitude but with lower frequencies. This is a relaxed state of mind, but yet alert. This is how, whether it is meditation or japa, will change. And I have talked about the types of chemicals that can change. Ultimately, how Gandhiji used first japa to overcome fear, later he used it as a form of prayer, and ultimately for purification of mind. And that is what we can use to overcome this negativity of bias. What does purification of mind means? To overcome the negativity bias, because this negativity bias is what is preventing us to evolve. Until and unless we overcome this negativity bias, we will not be able to evolve. So I would like to just conclude everything what I have said and connect it to health. In my opinion, Gandhiji had found his own unique formula for his spiritual sadhana through his Ramanama Vrata and the Ekadash Vratas. This formula, of course, holds good when we look at it just from the point of view of health. He also kept testing his inner work, that is Ramanama Japa and the 11 vows, through his outer work towards political freedom for the country. First, he laid down the foundation or groundwork for understanding and implementing the concept of mind-body connection. And his life was a testimony of that understanding. And he thus showed how, when his mind-body connect is properly understood and implemented in our daily lives, it results in the proper beneficial habits, resulting not only in our personal well-being, but also social well-being. Just the repetition of the japa Ramanama will reduce the negativity bias that is already innate within us. This is at the level of mind. When the mind is reduced of its negativity, we are naturally closer to our true nature and thus start contributing towards well-being of others. And at the physical level, His relentless and enduring walks, along with insistence of physical labor, sharir shrama, helped him to keep his body fit. And now there is ample scientific evidence to show how increased physical activity on a regular basis helps not only on cardiovascular health, but also in regulating our moods, concentration, and memory by releasing many of the chemicals like endorphin, dopamine, and a newest chemical called BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Self-regulation of food intake, aswada, and on top of that, intermittent fasting for days together improved his health, except at times when fasting was far too long a period, which affected his health. Now, there is ample evidence to show low-calorie diet and or intermittent fasting will help overall digestion and absorption of food, and also results in the longevity. No wonder our digestive system or the gut is referred to as the second brain of the body. So a combination of mental training to develop equanimity, both outward and inward, and physical training through physical labor and food regulation kept him healthy. In my view, this is the major contribution of Gandhiji towards health, wherein he demonstrates through his lifestyle the science of body-mind connection. To conclude, Gandhiji lived a holistic life. He not only understood the science of mind-body connection, but also harmonized with the external environment. He integrated his inner work, that is, freedom from the senses, and outer work, that is, freedom for the nation. He was the beacon of truth. Truth, according to Gandhiji, was harmonizing thought, word, and action at each and every moment. It was also attaining freedom from the senses for his inner work and freedom for the nation as his outer work, as I just mentioned. And this was the deeper meaning of Swaraj, getting freedom from the senses. He was the epitome of ahimsa. He followed ahimsa at the level of thought, word, and action. He followed ahimsa as not merely a state of harmlessness towards others, but as a positive state of love and of doing good to others, even if they are evil doers. Gandhiji was the ultimate neurosculptor. His ultimate aim of life was to realize that supreme truth. By following the tools he prescribed, we can be, of course, healthy, but also strive for self-realization. Thus, the repetition of Ramanama and following the 11 vows that Gandhiji suggested has an effect on the brain through the mechanism of neuroplasticity. When these tools are applied in a diligent, conscious manner, they help us not just at the level of brain and mind through the release of neurochemicals, but also result in the formation of new neural networks through change in our habits, actions, and our behaviors, resulting in lasting experiences. This ultimately leads to improved health and well-being, to say the least. I just want to conclude with this last sentence. Ultimately, Gandhiji, as a practitioner of Ekadash Vratas and Ramanama Japa, he led the to following the laws of universal love. This is what led him to follow the laws of universal love. This is how both Gandhiji and Vinoba Ji were able to wish for Jai Jagat and not just Jai Bharat. Thank you.